carbon tax is a tax levied on each unit of emissions produced by fossil fuels. Generally speaking, this is an additional cost to burn fossil fuels for heating, electricity, and transport. But why are carbon taxes so popular? Every time we hear an economist speak about climate change, we hear them say the same thing again and again. We need a carbon tax. We need to increase the carbon taxes. Why are they so obsessed with carbon taxes? Well, let's think of the options. There are two main policy alternatives: direct regulation, otherwise known as command and control, and economic incentives, of which a carbon tax is one. Let's look at the first option, direct regulation or command and control. This type of regulation is very common. We're used to speed limits, smoking bans, criminal legislation. Regulators are used to designing these type of policies, and citizens are used to responding to them. Direct regulation has worked in the environmental sphere also. CFCs were used for refrigeration for many years, but scientists figured out that CFCs were depleting the ozone layer, that outer layer of the atmosphere that protects us from certain UV rays. So they were banned completely. Direct regulation works really well when we want a complete ban, like with CFCs, or when the cost is similar across all firms or individuals. In the EU, car firms are regulated on the rate at which they produce emissions. There are energy efficiency standards on new build homes in many countries. These regulations affect each individual or firm in a similar way, and regulation is a useful tool in this context. We should remember that climate policies should cause as little inconvenience as possible. Where everyone is inconvenienced in the same way, such as by a smoking ban or a planning guideline, then a regulation is useful. When everyone is not inconvenienced in the same way, this is where economic incentives come in. Economic incentives involve placing a price on carbon through either a carbon tax or a cap and trade system. And why is this helpful? Well, let's think of an example. John and Jane are neighbours. John doesn't do much driving as he can walk to work, but Jane must commute 30 minutes by car to work. If, for example, a regulation were imposed tomorrow limiting the amount of driving we could do, this is forcing everyone to adjust their driving habits in the same way. That's easier for John than it is for Jane. If, however, a carbon tax were introduced, everyone has the flexibility to choose how they reduce their carbon consumption. John may decide to drive less because he can, while Jane may still drive because she must. Now let's think of how the carbon tax affects other consumption decisions. John really likes to consume bananas. Jane, however, hates bananas. Jane may then reduce her carbon footprint in the supermarket by consuming more locally produced foods. And this is the crux of why carbon tax is so good. It guides us towards reducing our emissions in a way that suits our circumstances and preferences. And it does this automatically by adjusting prices. And the same rationale applies to other goods and services. If it's easier for one electricity generator to reduce their emissions than another, then they will. If they don't, their prices will adjust and we'll buy more electricity from the clean producer. The real beauty of the carbon tax is that we do all this decision making automatically. The prices change and the act of weighing up the pros and cons of various options happens as part of our household budgeting. This is a huge bonus, as it is really difficult to take too many factors into account when buying goods and services. But doesn't the carbon tax mean the cost goes up and I have to pay more for the things that I buy? And do we all pay that much attention to prices in supermarkets? These are problems, but there are solutions. Subscribe to the channel to find out more.